Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Kinchy. I'm the director of the Kaufman Interfaith Institute. And it's been my privilege for the last 8 years to direct this wonderful program. As many of you know, Sylvia Kaufman started the Jewish Christian dialogue in Muskegon last century in 1990. And for a number of years, it was a highlight of West Michigan when Sylvia sponsored the Jewish Christian Dialogue. In 2006, when they were planning to relocate to Chicago, they came to Grand Valley State University and wanted Grand Valley to take over this dialogue and to expand it to Jewish, Christian, Muslim. So since 2006, every 3 years, we have had the Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue. And we're really pleased that it's happening again. 2006 was the first time it was here, and President Haas welcomed us, and he'll probably mention that. But it was one of his first events here. But we're so pleased with the way in which the Grand Rapids community, together with Muskegon and other communities, have come together to support interfaith understanding and interfaith acceptance. At this point, I really want to honor Sylvia Kaufman and the wonderful work she did in starting this. And she and Dick Kaufman provided the initial funding for the Kaufman Endowment, which helps us run programs like this. And so thank you very much, Sylvia and Dick, for what you've done. At this point, Sylvia will give us a welcome and have a few words to say as we start our conference.
Good morning. And welcome to day 2 of our 2018 Jewish Christian Muslim Dialogue. We're really happy to see you here, and we hope you like both the program today, which we got a taste of it yesterday, those of you who were there yesterday, which I'm sure you'll love, and the new format. And we value your feedback, so would appreciate if you'd let us know what you think about that and other things about the event on your evaluation form. Today's theme, religious identity, dividing or uniting, could not be more relevant in today's fractured world. And it also is very relevant as the dialogue during the Year of Interfaith Friendship that was envisioned and planned by our director, Doug Kinchy. We're both honored and grateful to our 3 distinguished speakers that you've taken the time to come here. Rabbi Cosgrove, Jennifer Peace, Professor Jennifer Peace, and Dr. Ibu Patel. We are very grateful. You're all very busy and have many commitments, and thank you for being here. I'd like to thank Doug for his outstanding leadership as director of the Kaufman Institute. He has done an incredible job not only initiating new programs, but expanding existing ones. And as you can see, those of you who come here often, it get better and better every year. Thank you, Doug, and also to the staff and all the volunteers who support him. And finally, I'd like to personally thank, and on behalf of the Kaufman Institute, express our utmost gratitude to President Tom Haas. Tom welcomed us in 2006 at our dialogue, his first year as president of Grand Valley. And now, amidst his busy schedule as he prepares to step down as president, he joins us today, but he's not leaving Grand Valley. He's still going to teach here, so he will be around. And we are thrilled and honored that he is here to greet us and with his final remarks. It's It's an honor and a privilege to introduce President Haas. Tom, we cannot thank you enough. The depth of our appreciation is beyond words. It would be a complete understatement to say we will miss you immensely. But please join me in a warm welcome to President Tom Haas.
Well, thank you, Sylvia. It is great to be here with you. It is now 5 minutes from snow. But really good. I want to welcome, but I do want to start off, though, in our own ways, too, for a moment of silence, because what had happened in Pittsburgh touched us all. It touched this campus. It touched, hopefully, the rest of this nation, too. And I'm always optimistic that there will be changes. And if we can, just in our own way, let's take a moment of silence for those that have passed, those that are suffering because of the incidents there as well. So please, in your own way. Thank you very much. Well, our mission is very clear: to shape student lives, professions, and society. And our students are a remarkable group of individuals. And in my time here since 2006, I have grown to have such love and affection for our students at the graduate and the undergraduate level, and now with well over 115,000 alumni, too, that are serving here in West Michigan, across the state, nation, and across the globe. And with that, they have this internalization of values that we want to have them achieve while they're here. And I think that the Kaufman Institute really represents much of that value of respect for individuals. Maybe we do have different faith trajectories and foundations, but what we do have together is a humanity that we can celebrate together. And that's why I'm so thrilled with the investments that the Kaufmans have made in this institute. And so thank you so much for that. Doug said that I think it was my first ever opportunity to speak in front of a group of Grand Valley. This was even before my investiture. And I was so thrilled to meet the Kaufmans during that first engagement and the time that we had together, because I felt such a connection with the efforts that we were putting forward and keeping in mind the mission that we have as an institution. So I was thrilled to be here, and that was right here in the Eberhard Center, too. I remember that as well. So now we have included the dialogue to include a perspective of those from the Muslim tradition. And I really want to thank Doug again for his leadership over these past years as well. So let's recognize Doug one more time. And it's also great when I look out in the audience, we have Don and Nancy Lubbers with us today. They continue to be an integral part of this university. They have created the space that Mark Murray and Elizabeth and Marcia and I have had to build upon, and always good to have them here. Please. Well, as mentioned, that we had this initial gift to establish the Kaufman Institute, and today I have actually two announcements to be made. First off, there will be now, with their support, the establishment of the Sylvia and Richard Kaufman Interfaith Endowed Directorship, created with an additional generous gift from the Kaufmans. Thank you very much for that. And Dean Doug Kinchy, who's been a director, will be in that role as the initial individual holding that particular endowed directorship. So thank you again from all of us. Again, that is another point of investment into Grand Valley and our mission as well. So I am actually really thrilled with that. It's going to ensure leadership and sustained leadership of this Kaufman Institute now for generations into the future. We do touch a future with our gifts and our investments in Grand Valley State University, and this will be one that we can ensure that the Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue will go forward. Of course, we'll have annual conferences, of course. We'll have community events, and what we will also have is student interfaith interns on college campuses as well. So again, a big thank you for that. And finally, because I have been tasked with finding the right people to recognize during commencement ceremonies, and the board has recently approved that Sylvia Kaufman will receive an honorary degree in April. Congratulations. So I, again, want to say welcome to everyone here. Appreciate you spending some time last night and today, this morning and this afternoon, as we continue to peel back the theme of religious identity, dividing or uniting. Thank you very much.
As I believe those of you who have been here before, our day is structured in 3 parts. Each section will begin with a major presentation from one of our speakers representing Jewish, Christian, or Muslim perspectives, followed by responses from the other 2. And then we will open up for questions and answers. In the previous years, this has been a really wonderful, in-depth involvement in this topic. So I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, a Jewish perspective from Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who is chief rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City, the largest conservative synagogue in New York. His doctorate from the University of Chicago, and a leader in the Jewish area. And so it's a great privilege to have as our lead speaker, Dr. Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove.
To Doug, thank you so much for the gracious introduction, the warm invitation. To Sylvia, to the entire Kaufman family, thank you so much for your warmth and hospitality, to President Haas for your leadership, and to all those here at Grand Valley who have made this possible, and most of all to my co-panelists, to Jennifer Peace and to Ibu Patel, who is somewhere. I haven't even said anything and people are walking out. It reminds me of a story of 3 clergy from the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish tradition who were called to sit on a panel. And the final question from the moderator, the Doug, if you will, was one last question. When your time comes to meet your Maker, and you are, if it should happen that your body is lying there in wake and 2 of your parishioners should walk by, what would you like them to say about your ministry? And so the Imam says, well, should it happen that I should be lying there and 2 of my congregants should walk by, I would like one to turn to the other and say that he was there for us in our moment of sorrow. He was there for us in our moment of joy. He built community. That's what I would like my congregants to say. And then he says to the Christian minister, what would you like one congregant to say, and she said, well, if it should be the case that two of my parishioners are walking by my body as I meet my Maker, says, I'd like one to say that she was a moral exemplar, that she brought her community closer to Jesus our Lord, that this was a woman who brought faith into our lives. So asks the rabbi, says, what would you like to have him said? And the rabbi says, should it be the case that two of my congregants are walking by my body, I would like one of them to turn to the other and say, I think he's moving. How many interfaith jokes do you know? That's so. Look, the timing of this conference couldn't be better. Here we are. This time next week, we'll all be sitting at our Thanksgiving tables, please God, and we'll be thinking of those very pilgrim fathers who had sought these shores as a refuge from the intolerant discriminations exercised by a dominant majority church of the old world. And so we come here to think about the opportunities and challenges to that vision of tolerance. Certainly as a Jew, I always think in these contexts of those famous words spoken by George Washington in 1790 at the Truro Synagogue in Newport, where he speaks of the tolerance and freedom as laid out in the book of Micah. May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. A beautiful vision that we are here to affirm today. And then, as President Haas signaled, the events of Pittsburgh happened. And as a Jew, it has sent shockwaves through the community, the worst anti-Semitic attacks in U.S. history. Personally, as someone who married a daughter of Squirrel Hill of the neighborhood, and last week I was in Pittsburgh for funerals of parents of my wife's friends through high school. Next week I'll be back in Pittsburgh, of course, for Thanksgiving. It's hit home in a very personal way. Anti-Semitism, the ability of words to give rise to violence. We've also felt that this is perhaps an assault on a certain vision of America, an America that welcomes the stranger, the huddled masses yearning to be free, an America that celebrates difference, that dignifies views not one own, that embraces the other. In the polarized and often toxic identity politics of our time that Sylvia spoke of, we're asking questions about the hatreds on the far right, the hatreds on the far left, and when the claims of our particular identities could supersede the common humanity that we all share. We ask, to what degree is Washington's vision a viable one? Or as the conference title itself asks, is religious identity the source of division and divide, or is it the very means by which those divides can be bridged? As a congregational rabbi and a historian of the American Jewish experience, I spend my days and nights thinking about the push and the pull, the claims and counterclaims of the nature of what it means to be an American Jew. The challenge of living a hyphenated life, seeking to balance the tensions of the identity politics of my particular community. Everyone on some level is working out the hyphenated nature of our lives as Christian Americans, as Muslim Americans, our faith, our gender, our politics, our sexuality. To be human is to see the world through the lens of our multiple selves. Du Bois wrote of a double consciousness, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings within one dark body. Every people, faith, or gender wrestles with hyphenated identities, and all of us on some level contend with the degree to which the complexities of our identities prompt us to find common cause with our brothers and sisters who themselves are negotiating the hyphenated aspects of their own existence. My remarks this morning will understandably, as a rabbi, focus on the Jewish experience in America, though my hope is that it's by way of the lens of the Jewish experience that we'll emerge with a language relevant to all the hyphenated identities of the American religious experience and hopefully build bridges between the two. Biblically speaking, we might say that the first hyphenated Hebrew may have been Joseph, who went down to Egypt at the end of the book of Genesis. To this day, the Friday night blessing said over children at the Sabbath table recalls the patriarch Jacob's anxiety over whether his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, would be able to live the hyphen of being both Jews and Egyptians. The biblical story of Purim recounts the tale of Esther, Mordecai, and the community negotiating the terms of their Persian Jewish existence. The festival of Hanukkah, which we'll celebrate as Jews in the coming weeks, documents the inner Jewish polemic concerning the degree to which Jews of that time should or shouldn't integrate Hellenistic culture into their lives, where we place our menorah, our candelabra of lights, somehow signifying the placement of our faith. As long as Jews have been Jews, we've struggled with the hyphen within, our Jewish selves in tension with the majority context and culture in which we've lived, a project that became only more pronounced in a post-Enlightenment, post-emancipation context. The modern balancing act of hyphenated identities was best described in pre-war Germany by the philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who spoke of Zweistromland, a land of two rivers, whereby, quote, the Jew resides on the banks of two cultures, that of the world and that of Judaism, a dual allegiance that preserves the Jew's integrity as both a Jew and a citizen of the modern world. As American Jews, I would start our story with a speech made by Theodore Roosevelt just about 100 years ago on the subject of being an American, a speech that has eerie resonance for us as Americans today. In Roosevelt's words, he wrote, "I stand for straight Americanism, unconditioned and unqualified, and I stand against every form of hyphenated Americanism. I do not speak of the hyphen when it's employed as a matter of mere convenience. I condemn its use whenever it represents an effort to form political parties along racial lines or bring pressure to bear on parties and politicians, not for American purposes, but in the interest of some group of voters of a certain national origin or of the country from which they or their fathers came." The speech is a powerful one. It's called America for Americans, and it's best understood in the context of the run-up to America entering World War I. In the wake of the sinking of the Lusitania and the death of 128 American citizens, public opinion shifted back and forth as to whether or not to enter the war, and Roosevelt decried the moral treason of anyone acting with a hyphenated identity. Our loyalties and duties, first and foremost, one and only, are as Americans. Notwithstanding the charged context in which the speech was given, it's interesting that the roots of Roosevelt's speech date back to a handful of years prior, strangely enough, to a Jew, Israel Zangwill, who wrote a play called The Melting Pot. The play, a loose adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, tells of the love affair of two Russian immigrants, one Jewish and one Christian, David and Vera, and he offers a grand love-conquers-all vision of America as God's crucible in which the diversity of European immigrants is melted away, thus the name The Melting Pot. Roosevelt was present on the play's opening night in 1909, and he leaned over the box shouting, "That's a great play, Mr. Zangwill, that's a great play." In fact, a few years later, Zangwill received a letter from the former president who shared, "That play I will always count among the very strong and real influences upon my thought and life." From that point onward, time and again, Roosevelt would give expression to an anti-hyphenated melting pot vision of American life. No matter your origins, ethnicity, or religious background, you were American, first, foremost, and only. In his words, our children's children will intermarry, one with another, your children's children, friends, and mine. Despite the play's critical success, Zangwill's work was not warmly received by all. Rabbi Judah Magnus, then the rabbi of Temple Emanuel on the Upper East Side, a competing congregation of mine. No, they have a nice rabbi. He's okay. He preached a fiery sermon against the play, suggesting that Zangwill's vision for America was essentially asking American Jews and all hyphenated Americans to give up their particular identities in the name of brotherhood and progress. Inspired by Magnus, one of the great American public intellectuals of the 20th century, Horace Callan, offered an alternative image in an essay, Democracy and the Melting Pot, where Callan argued in favor of an America that retains and celebrates difference and diversity, an orchestral vision whereby, quote, every type of instrument has its specific timbre and tonality. Callan never used the word multiculturalism, and to be sure, neither Zangwill nor Callan were really thinking beyond white America. But looking back on the 20th century, it was the Zangwill-Callan debate that set the terms for identity politics in this country for the decades to come. What was the American dream? Zangwill's monochromatic vision of acceptance, assimilation, and integration, or Callan's playground of pluralism for uprooted immigrants living out the fullness of their hyphenated lives? Whatever the answer, for the Jewish community, the debate between the two visions remained largely academic. In the first half of the 20th century, the number of David-Vera exogamous love stories was limited to single digits, given the taboos against intermarriage both from within the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community. Even as the children of those first immigrants began to assimilate into American society and shed the ethnic origins of their parents' generation, the religious bonds that kept the Jewish people together held strong. In the 1950s, the sociologist Will Herberg gave voice to a triple melting pot of Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. In his words, quote, the newcomer is expected to change many things about him as he becomes American. One thing, however, he is not expected to change is religion. Notwithstanding the ongoing barriers racially to a multicultural American vision, America continued on its stutter-start path towards a Callan orchestral vision, a vision that found as Jews its apotheosis in Sandy Koufax's decision not to pitch in the '65 World Series, the conscious decision of a celebrity sports figure at the highest levels of play to out himself as a Jew by not pitching on Yom Kippur. And it's something that I've been thinking about these past 24 hours with the passing of the founder of Marvel Comics, Stan Lee, once Stanley Lieber, the son of Romanian Jewish immigrants whose heroes, Spider-Man, the X-Men, and otherwise straddle the hyphens of their multiple identities, the insider-outsider status, each one playing out the fantasies and anxieties of being an American Jew. So when did it all change? It's hard to put a finger on any one moment. At the most basic level, Herberg's threefold distinction of Protestant, Catholic, and Jew was revealed to be an all too limited view of the manifold ethnicities, religions, and communities on the American scene. Herberg's vision didn't make room for Muslims, Hindus, or any other faith traditions. Moreover, from the 60s onwards, the David and Vera forbidden love stories of Zangwill's time had become commonplace. The Broadway success of Fiddler on the Roof, based on Sholem Aleichem's Tevye the Dairyman, reflected not just the shtetl kitsch of yesteryear, but also proxy expression for 1960s anxiety over the Gentile marital choices of Tevye's Jewish daughters. The 60s and 70s abounded with popular expressions of Jewish-Gentile boundary blurring. Last year, Philip Roth passed away. Just consider the forbiddenness of the Jewish-Gentile sexuality as described in Portnoy's Complaint, or Bridget Loves Bernie, the short-lived sitcom about an interfaith couple, or Woody Allen's famed romantic comedy Annie Hall. What was strictly taboo in Zangwill's time had by the 60s and 70s either become eroticized or the subject of witty reflection. By the time of Seinfeld, Will and Grace, Friends, or Mad About You, depictions of such Jewish-non-Jewish relations had lost their novelty altogether. so commonplace that they had ceased to be transgressive or worthy of comment at all. Does this mean that Zangwill won the argument? Are we all blending into one undifferentiated melting pot of Americans? The answer, I think, is a lot more complicated. I don't think Zangwill or Callan could have predicted the nature of present-day tribal identity politics. We're living in a time where identity is generated as much bottom-up as it is top-down, or as sociologists write, identities of consent, not descent. How people identify the communities which we affiliate with but are not assigned are intentional and ever-evolving decisions that every human being has the right to assert. Not just religion, but gender, sexuality, and so many other markers of identity are self-made and self-declared. I'll share with you a story that happened to me in my congregation just a while back. I'm the father of 4, and every Friday night I bring the children up to the beginning of my congregation to bless them with a Friday night blessing. Over the boys, may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh. Over the girls, may you be like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And I've done this for years, every year of my career, and I came back to the pew, and my teenage daughter leaned over to me and said, "Dad, you can't do that anymore." And it's not the first time my daughter's complained about my rabbinate, but I said, "Why can't I do that anymore?" And she said, "Well, because you're blessing them according to boys and girls, and Dad, there might be kids here who haven't yet figured it out." Wow. I mean, I felt very old at that moment. But I also realized how different their views of identity were from mine. My old school assumptions of how identity works, gender or otherwise, are simply no longer in play. Identities are fluid and porous and evolving in ways maybe they always have, but we haven't acknowledged. In a Pew study 10 years ago on American religious identity, it was reported that over 1/4 of Americans leave their faith of their birth in order to practice another religion or no religion at all, much higher if you count Protestants switching denominations. The Jewish community is a reflection of this bigger trend, with different kinds of Jews emerging, not just matrilineal and patrilineal, not just Jews-born Jews and converts to Judaism, but now we have new categories of Jews of no religion, Jews who identify Jewishly because they married someone Jewish, or someone Jewish who just practices, not Jewish, who just practices Judaism. For me and my generation, and you get the sense that I like popular culture, the watershed moment came apropos of this season by way of a Hanukkah song sung unexpectedly in 1994 on Saturday Night Live by the very funny and often crude comedian Adam Sandler. Those of you who watch the show, he was the Pete Davidson of his day. Sandler, who is Jewish, began his weekend update skit by explaining how tough it was to grow up in America living as a Jewish kid during Christmas. In response, he offers a song referred to as the Hanukkah song, with nearly every lyric rhyming with Hanukkah, harmonica, Veronica, or some combination, as Sandler outs a Rolodex of Jewish American celebrity. In his own words, David Lee Roth lights the menorah, so do James Caan, Kirk Douglas, and the late Dinah Shore. My favorite stanza is, "Guess who eats together at the Carnegie Deli? Bowser from Sha Na Na and Arthur Fonzarelli. Paul Newman's half Jewish, Goldie Hawn's half too. Put them together, what a fine-looking Jew." I still remember how proud I felt when a Saturday Night Live comedian so publicly identified as a Jew and proudly called out other Jewish celebrities. Looking back on it, though, the most important thing about the song may have been just how it reflected the changing categories of being Jewish were, and a revolution in who does and who doesn't get to assign someone the label of a Jew. Jews by association, by marriage, and fractional Jews. The reveal of the Sandler song was that it announced that the decision of who is and who isn't a Jew isn't made by some bearded rabbi, but by other means, in this case, popular culture. The conventional definitions and authority structures are in flux. Jews, like everyone else, are now modern families. In the words of Professor Shaul Magid, religion is a product of voluntarism and inventiveness as opposed to inherited tradition. Or as a title of another recent survey on American Jewry put it, Grande soy vanilla latte with cinnamon, no foam, Jewish identity and community in a time of unlimited choice. A time when identity is by way of consent, not descent, a time neither Zangwill or Callan could have ever imagined. You can trace the transformations of American Jewry by popular culture, intermarriage rates, or otherwise, but it all leads to the same conclusion. Somewhere along the way, Jews have become white people. My oldest daughter is applying to college right now. It's remarkable to me that the fact of her Jewishness never comes up. One's Jewish identity or religion at all has been replaced by what is called the ethno-racial pentagon, the 5 options one is given to define oneself: Black, white, Asian, Latino, and Native American. While the question as to why these 5 categories and not another 5 could be debated, one thing is for sure: being Jewish or Christian or Muslim is not one of them. Jewishness is no longer the distinguishing marker it once was. Jews no longer have a legal minority status. I grew up with stories about my grandparents who, despite graduating first in their class, couldn't get jobs because they were Jewish. Once upon a time, being Jewish was an impediment to social advancement. One's Jewish roots were spoken of in hushed tones. Jews changed their names and their neighborhoods in hopes of fitting in. Not anymore. Jews have gone from being the other to just another. From the first families of the nation right down to our own families, the most interesting thing to say about being a Jew or marrying a Jew in many but not all parts of the country is just how uninteresting it's become. Net, this is good, but it's a change that comes with consequences. There's a profound irony that at this very moment when it's so easy for Jews to live as Jews, so many Jews are making the decision to do otherwise, losing the hyphenated aspect of their existence. In the words of the late Professor Eugene Borowitz, Jews have become Marranos in reverse. Unlike the Marrano 15th century Spanish Jews who converted to Christianity but secretly lived Jewish lives, contemporary Jews publicly affirm our Jewish identities but choose to live lives as non-Jews. This whitening of American Jewry has fundamentally changed how we see ourselves and how the world sees us. For a very long time, Jews have been understood and understood themselves to be marginalized and oppressed, a persecuted condition that found its fullest and most horrific expression in the Holocaust. Notwithstanding the anti-Semitism from the far right as evidenced by Pittsburgh, or the hatreds emanating from the far left, for most American Jews, historic anti-Semitism and exclusion is not something experienced in the main. The Holocaust is firmly in the rearview mirror. Not only are Jews not oppressed, not only can Jews openly take pride in being Jewish, but the fact of being a contemporary American Jew puts that Jew in some of the most privileged company, not just of Jewish history, but of human history, period. Socially, economically, and otherwise, it is a very, very good thing to be born a Jew today. And while this fortuitous event is cause for celebration, it's also resulted in a sort of whiplash when it comes to identity politics of our time. In our hashtag intersectional era, where everything is polarized and everyone is labeled either an oppressor or oppressed, where do Jews fit in? How curious and troubling it is that at this very moment of fluid identities, a hardening of discourse is also taking place where people are being told to take sides in the name of ideological purity. Are Jews outsiders or insiders, vulnerable or strong, part of the solution or part of the problem? Can privileged Jews still invoke that they were once strangers in a strange land? How does such a claim sit with the rest of the world? Neither Jews nor non-Jews have quite figured out where Jews fit in to the puzzle of our post-ethnic America. Again, given the persecuted history of the Jews, it's a pretty good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless. And while we're talking about Jewish power, if there's anyone who's not yet a little uncomfortable, let me spend a minute or two on Israel. Because for some 2,000 on Israel, for some 2,000 years, as Judaism developed in the diaspora, communities around the world have longed and prayed for a return to our ancient homeland. Being Jewish was a religion with a national component, minus, of course, the nation. The rebirth of Israel in 1948 was a fulfillment and break in the arc of Jewish history, a fulfillment in the sense that thousands of years of Jewish hopes and dreams were finally realized by way of the efforts of Israel's founding. It was a break in the sense that this stateless people that had existed without any of the obligations or questions that come with being a nation, like taxes, military, borders, treatment of minority populations, all of a sudden had to be asked and answered by way of a long dormant project of Jewish nation building. The story of Israel from a scrappy upstart to a startup nation is nothing short of a breathtaking story. The story of how a historically marginalized people took their destiny into their own hands, built a nation, and in doing so became the subject of their own sentence rather than the object of someone else's. Intellectually, of course, American Jews know that Israel needs to make difficult choices to survive. And like any imperfect nation, it will sometimes make the right choices and it will sometimes make the wrong choices. Israel exists in a dangerous neighborhood, surrounded by enemies, and must have the security and well-being of its own citizenry at the forefront of its concern, a question very much in play these last 48 hours. In practice, however, it's much more complicated. What happens when the scrappy David of a startup nation becomes the Goliath in the eyes of so many, and in many cases, so many American Jews? What shall we do when the Jewish state behaves in a manner contrary to the liberal Torah of much of American Jewry? What does it mean when the very nation created to address the disempowered plight of diaspora Jewry is perceived to have leveraged its newfound power in a manner at odds with Judaism's hallmark attention to the condition of the stranger in her midst? Israel was founded in 1948, and 70 years in, American Jews are still actively wrestling with this Israel that is central to but not interchangeable with Jewish identity. As a religion, Judaism has had a connection to the land ever since the very first promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. But American Jewry has yet to figure out what it exactly means to be connected, invested, and an advocate for a country that is a critical part of our faith, but not the place in which we live. This tension is another hyphen of American Jews. When the policies of Israel do not reflect our values, when the Judaism we practice in America is not acknowledged as Judaism by the rabbinical authorities of the Jewish state, where exactly does that leave American Jewry? Does the Jewish state represent all of world Jewry? Must American Jewry defend every policy of the Israeli government? There are those with disagreements with the present American administration, but I would never question whether those individuals are pro-American. As Americans, we believe our objections to this or that administration are expressions of our patriotism and love of country. So why should those Jewish or non-Jewish who love Israel or even just recognize its historic need to exist, but disagree with Israel's government, be labeled anti-Israel? Should North American Jewry have a say in the policies of the Jewish state? How is an American Jew supposed to respond when Israel is attacked by those who would deny its right to exist? Does any criticism of Israel make someone an anti-Semite? Does Jewish criticism of Israel make a Jew a self-hating Zionist? It's hard for American Jews to sort out these distinctions within, how much more so when that criticism is coming from the place where the line between anti-Semitic and anti-Israel rhetoric is blurred. The Pittsburgh shooting is a watershed moment for many reasons, but American Jewish support for Israel will be one of them. How will American Jewry come to terms with the fact of an administration which on the one hand is unambiguously pro-Israel and on the other hand sowing the very vitriol from which hateful words and deeds emanate? What does it mean to be living in a time when what is best for Israel may not be what is best for American Jewry? Long before our present challenges, the Yiddish writer Shalom Aleichem wrote, "Schwer zu sein a Yid," it's hard to be a Jew. Yes, we can rejoice in the existence of a Jewish state. We can rejoice in the station of American Jewry, but it can still be hard, it can still be complicated, sometimes very hard, and sometimes very complicated. I've laid out quite a bit, from the fluid and porous nature of identity to the journey of the Jewish people from disenfranchised immigrants to a privileged diaspora with a Jewish state, to the complexities of intersectional politics, the comforts of being a Jew in the backdrop of the Pittsburgh anti-Semitic shootings. It's 100 years since Roosevelt gave that speech, and once again, America is living through a flashpoint that on the one hand frowns on hyphenated identities, but on the other hand suffers from a hardening of boundaries. It's a lot, and it's a lot to sort out, and it's all very much in play. And I look forward to hearing from Jennifer and Ibu as to whether the Christian American or Muslim American communities face analogous hyphenated tensions. But as we look forward to the discussion to follow, I'd like to propose that perhaps not so much in untangling our present state of affairs, but in naming the complexities of our hyphenated existences, we have somehow stumbled on a useful language by which our dialogue will play out. To recognize that because I'm trying my darndest to negotiate the tensions of what it means to be an American Jew, I will be that much more sympathetic to Jenny or Ibu or any fellow countryman or woman who is similarly trying to figure out the hyphenated nature of their lives, that I can hopefully embrace the uniqueness of my identity and recognize that while my faith differs from that of my Christian and Muslim brothers and sisters, the fact of my Americanism or some other aspect of my identity brings us together. I'm prompted to recognize that within each of us lies a razor-thin hyphen upon which the totality of our beings are delicately balanced, that none of us possess the totality of truth. All of us are struggling with the same issues. We're all trying to figure it out, and in that realization is born a humility from which dialogue, mutual understanding, and common cause can be found. A final image. At the conclusion of this Sabbath and every Sabbath, my family and I, we gather at our kitchen table and we recite a prayer called Havdalah in Hebrew. Havdalah means separation, a blessing that marks the end, the distinction between the Sabbath and the rest of the week, the difference between the sacred and the profane, night and day, the seventh day from the other six, and the difference between the Jewish people and the rest of the world. It is a prayer that reminds us of the hyphens of our lives, temporal, theological, generational, and otherwise, and calls on us to celebrate them and make them sacred, a beautiful and beautifully countercultural blessing. As a Jew, but really as an American, with an aspiration for diverse faith communities to live side by side, ours must be an America ready to live vibrant, committed, and engaged lives as Jews, as Muslims, as Christians, and otherwise, each searching for an unknowable God. We must find a language of tribalism without triumphalism, affiliation without parochialism, peoplehood without ethnocentrism. In other words, we need to find a language and lifestyle of Havdalah, of difference and distinction appropriate for our age. It's not easy. In fact, it's a very narrow path to walk, but it's upon that narrow hyphen of our identities by which we will find our way towards actualizing our future, the symphony of American life we so desperately desire and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Cosgrove. That was a very challenging and inspiring and troubling approach, but very much appreciated. I'm sure it's going to lead to lots of interesting comment. As our pattern goes, we will now hear from a response from the Christian representative, Jennifer Howe-Peace, and then from the Muslim representative, Ibu Patel. I'll ask you to come to the podium for your responses, and then we'll have a little bit of panel discussion, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers.
Good morning. Lovely to see all of you. That was so rich. I feel like I'm processing and appreciating and thinking. It was like multitasking to sit there and listen and know I was going to respond in a few minutes. I think I want to just respond in three places to some of what Rabbi Cosgrove said. The first is to think about this notion of hyphenation, which I think is very powerful. And I was sitting there thinking, as a Christian, I am rarely asked to think about the idea of being Christian American. In fact, more often than not, I find myself saying to folks, you know, we're not a Christian nation. I'm not sure what that means to you, but the way you say that makes me nervous. You know, there's a way in which Christian and American has been overly conflated. So I think that my role is more to suggest a separation between those two categories and perhaps insert that hyphen and invite people to think about these as aspects of their identity, but not conflations. I think I see a resurgence of that kind of rhetoric right now, and that worries me a little. So it's helpful to think about those of us who have, say, the privilege, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's almost creates an internal blind spot, the privilege to not think about ourselves as hyphenated in certain places and circumstances, and those of us who are sort of forced to see ourselves as divided, as this part of myself doesn't necessarily fit with this larger context that I'm in. We were talking last night, we had a lovely dinner, and one of the things that I started wondering about as I was listening to Elliot talk was whether there's a kind of temporal hyphenation that goes on for many of us too. Ibu didn't like that phrase, so he can reply to it when he comes up. But this idea of, for example, my father was the first in his whole extended family to go to college. So, and he went to Yale on a full scholarship. You can imagine the kind of, he actually said to me once, I can't necessarily be the smartest person at Yale, but I can be the one working the hardest. And I thought, wow, that's hard work. That's some determination. But having a father who was first generation to attend college absolutely instilled in me a kind of intensity around academic achievement, let's say, and this idea that that's how you pull yourself up out of any circumstance you might be in. So my father really had that hyphenated identity, and I inherited that to some extent. So I was asking Elliot if he thought there was a kind of temporal hyphenation for folks who didn't live a particular experience. So you might not have lived through the Holocaust or been the child of a survivor, but there's a generational kind of experience where there's tension between what you experienced and what your history was that creates this other form of hyphenation that's almost a temporal hyphenation. So that sparked my own thinking, and I'm going to play with that a little more. But the other thing I want to just note, immigration, I think focusing on who we are and how we got here and how we became Americans is such an important story. The way who we are has changed over time. I was thinking, as you were talking about the Immigration Act in 1965 that radically changed the face of who we were, who we are, what we look like. It took out a Northern European bias in our immigration laws. So we got folks coming from all sorts of countries with their own religious traditions that were widely diverse. Huge influx of Sikh communities, for example, and others. So we have this changing picture of who we actually are that becomes increasingly in conflict with this perhaps static picture of who we imagine ourselves to be, who we were. And I think in some cases that's really creating and continues to create some of the tensions. We're not willing to really look around and say, who are we really? What is the diversity that is actually around us? Even, here in Grand Rapids, we were talking about that last night. There's quite a bit of, in some cases, somewhat hidden diversity, religiously and otherwise, that really is changing the shape of our communities, and we need to be more intentional and pay more attention to the reality of that. And then the last thing I'll just add to the mix is I'm fascinated by, and this is just a partially thought out thought at this point, but this notion of Jews as other and then Jews as just another. I thought that was a nice way to think about this shift. Certainly, there's a long history in Jewish-Christian relations of Jews being the other to Christians, and the formation of our identities have been very tied up in how we experience and understand each other. And I think